Today we're going to be discussing mitigating reading fluency roadblocks for students living in poverty. This is a topic that is really close to my heart and very imperative to my practice as a third grade teacher in a Title I school. I see the effects of this poverty every day in our students. Our school's official number is 65% economically disadvantaged, but the immediate population I work with is even more so. As the reading planning specialist, this is something I definitely take into account when I'm planning and choosing learning activities for our grade level. There are a lot of factors that go into a student's ability to read, but none of these cast as wide a net as poverty because it affects so many aspects of their life and subsequently so many of the dimensions of reading. And it's such a complicated cycle. I mean, the fact that we are attempting to get rid of poverty necessitates that we create a literate society. However, this same poverty makes it difficult to create that literate society. Despite the fact that we are one of the most developed countries in the world, we still have more than 16 million children living in poverty, and this equates to 1 in 5 under the age of 18. So the odds are, in your practice, this is something that you have seen and that you will need to address. Sadly, it can be predicted that children from the lowest SES status generally perform more than 60% below children from the more advanced environments. So that tells me poverty is certainly impacting, but even more so that there is much that we can do on our end as educators. Lyndon Johnson said that poverty must not be a bar to learning, and learning must offer an escape from poverty. I think this is just truly reflective of the cyclical nature between poverty and literacy. So let's examine this path to fluency as it's impacted by these specific roadblocks. First, we have to look at how poverty affects student achievement and learning. Eric Jensen, who has studied the poverty impact extensively, refers to this as the each component, that there are emotional and social challenges, there are acute and chronic stressors, cognitive lags, and health and safety issues that are an everyday issue for many children who live in poverty. And all of this creates a lot of static between us and the ability to create fluent readers. Some of the physical implications created by poverty is the lack of nutritionally dense food. This can affect their ability to learn every day in our classroom, but even more globally, it can affect the physical structure of their brain, their actual physical growth. They also often have less access to quality medical care, and this can create a lot of physical challenges that will affect their ability to learn long term. Students in poverty often have cognitive ramifications from the stress of resource insufficiency. An overdose of the stress hormone, cortisol, is essentially poison to small developing brains. And we've found that students in the lower SES often have physically smaller brains because of this impact of cortisol and the stress of their environment. Beyond the physical implications, a lot of their early learning experiences are often not as rich as students who have more affluent backgrounds. For example, kids in middle class neighborhoods generally own at least a dozen books per child. And in some of our most poverty-stricken neighborhood, we're looking at 1 book per 300 children. That's not a lot of exposure to print before they reach school age. These economic realities often make it unlikely that students are going to be exposed to activities that stimulate growth and learning, and this also impacts their background knowledge. Further fluency barriers for these lower SES students is one of the most major is found in vocabulary deficits. Just as we talked about with the limited exposure to text, limited exposure to language, both oral and written, is often a ramification of poverty. Students from the lowest SES are generally exposed to fewer positive interaction and overall less words in general. This gap is so substantial between the higher SES students, who have generally been exposed to 30 million more words prior to entering school than their lower SES counterparts. Student vocabulary is related to parent vocabulary. 90% of a student's vocabulary is a direct result of parental vocabulary. So when we're looking at a 30 million word deficit before they even reach our classrooms, we're definitely starting at a deficit as far as vocabulary. Also tying back to the lack of text resources, these students who live in poverty don't have the background knowledge that will support fluency and comprehension of more scholastic texts. As we mentioned before, lower SES students don't have the same access to books and libraries and texts in the home as their more affluent counterparts. In many low-income communities, as we said before, the book ratio is 1 per 300 children. So as these students do enter school with these deficits, with having been exposed to text, with having been exposed to less vocabulary, having less background knowledge to support reading, it's no surprise that standardized test scores are a particularly damning area for students in these brackets. You can take a look at these graphics and see that we do a good job between 4th and 8th grade of trying to bridge this gap, but unfortunately the gap is still very prevalent, as is presented by the fact that we have more students who are below basic both in 4th grade and in 8th grade when comparing free and reduced students to ineligible students. So let's look at how we as educators can overcome these barriers. I love this. Fluency is of little value in itself. Its value lies in what it enables. I think of fluency as the bridge. The other reading dimensions factor in learning the words and pieces of words, and then comprehension is our ultimate goal. And fluency to me is this bridge. It's the bridge to comprehension. And for a lot of our lower economic students, the bridge is out. And truly, it is difficult to label any dimension of reading instruction as more important than any of the others because they're interrelated and sequential. But the goal of reading is comprehension, and without that, it ceases to be purposeful. Fluency is this gatekeeper to comprehension, and it encompasses all the dimensions that precede it and enable the dimension beyond it. Fluency expert Dr. Samuels initiated the automaticity theory, and this maintains that people only have a certain amount of mental energy, and when the mind is called upon to do complicated things that require a coordination of mental energies, like reading does, that a lot of the menial labor has to be accomplished so efficiently that the task would appear to be automatic. And this would leave the mental reserves to focus on comprehending the text that needs to be decoded. So this is where we need to get our students, regardless of the economic backgrounds they come from, which lends to the question, how? One of the programs that I've looked at that seems to accomplish this very well is called Read Naturally. And this is a commercial program. It's developed by a Title I reading teacher. And there are commercial products available through their company. And what was found is that using this strategy just 20 or 30 minutes a day for 3+ days a week had a significant impact on improving students' fluency. In 2 studies reported by Hasbrouck, Einot, and Rogers, which it bears noting that Einot is one of the authors of the program, but she found that 2nd and 3rd grade Title I students, as well as her 6th grade special education students, showed significant improvement in their fluency. The 2nd and 3rd graders got 32 weeks of this instruction, and in that 32 weeks, their average words correct per minute increased from 17.9 to 71.6. And this is slightly greater than the 2 words per week that we aim for. The great thing I like about this program is that while it is a commercial product, it can be adapted without purchasing their products at all. And this is the basic format. And you'll have to forgive my graphics here. The first step is that students are assessed and we determine their baseline fluency. Using this number, you establish a goal. Make sure that your goal is reasonable and achievable. And there's some basic guidelines looking at 80 to 90 words per minute for students at primary and 90 to 120 for intermediate. The first step is that students will read a cold passage, which means that they haven't been exposed to this passage at all. It's with their given range, and they have some choice in the passage. Students will use a timer. They'll make note of words that they find difficult. They can highlight or underline these and graph their beginning results. The next step, students continue practicing multiple times. This time not timed, this is simply practice. This can be done either through technology with a recording or with a mentor reader, because it is imperative that the students read along with the model so that they're essentially partner reading. Then students will self-time for 1 minute, working toward their goal rate. They're going to continue this independently until a teacher is available to monitor their progress. Then finally, the teacher monitors this same progress and determines if the student has met their goal. This is determined if they have met their numeric goal, but also that they have 3 or fewer errors. They also, and this is a factor that I really like, because a lot of times when we look at fluency, we simply look at numbers. And we all know that a lot of our students are fabulous word callers, but have no idea what they've read. So students will also have to correctly answer questions to assess their comprehension, so that they're not simply word calling. Then students themselves will graph the new score in comparison to their cold read. So this gives them a chance to essentially be reading competitively against themselves. I think students like the technology. They like the fact that they're working toward a very specific goal. They like that they have a model, and that there's not a time limit that you have to reach this goal by X date. It's simply at their own pace. Students will continue this process until approximately 12 passages at that level have been mastered. If the student is not showing progress toward his goal on the cold read, students will continue at the same level for an additional 12 passages, because the goal is that we'll not only see improvement from the cold to the hot read, but the next cold read will also be witness to this same improvement. The process is fluid. As I mentioned, it is important that you assess comprehension beyond simple numeric fluency, and this is at teacher discretion. This video provides a little greater depth in explaining the process.
Read Naturally combines 3 research-proven strategies to explicitly teach reading fluency. The first of these strategies is teacher modeling.
We all do this. You read for your children and they read something back. Teacher modeling. They read better because they heard you read it. You might pair yourself with the child and you read right along with them and they'll be better at that. Or you might pair a good reader with a poor reader. Choral reading. All these methods help children to become better readers. In 1969, Dr. Heckelman developed a strategy he called the neurological impress method. Many of you probably use it. He read into the ear of a student at the child's reading rate. A little bit faster, a little bit slower. But he never stopped to teach anything. He just read with the child, and the child read right along with him. It was like a duet reading. He did this with 24 7th through 9th grade boys who were an average of 3 years behind in reading. He did this with each boy for 15-minute blocks of time until each boy had read 7 hours and 15 minutes with him. So for 7 hours and 15 minutes of tutoring time, the average gain was 1.9 years. Now, why did those boys become better readers? Well, I don't know for sure. But I do know from teaching that those boys this was probably one of the few times they actually read for 15 minutes straight, uninterrupted. Read correctly. Didn't make mistakes because someone was right there with them. Had expression, so it meant something. And they weren't scared. They weren't nervous. And so, teacher modeling, 2 people reading together at the same time is extremely powerful in improving fluency.
Another strategy that improves reading fluency is repeated reading, reading the same thing over and over until mastery. In fact, the National Reading Panel says this is the most powerful strategy for improving fluency. LaBerge and Samuels did a study in the 1970s that clearly showed that if students read a passage many times, they read it faster and they understood it better. Most people don't find that surprising.
But one other thing that was surprising, it impacted how fluently they could read subsequent passages. So the reading repeatedly transferred to later reading. That's the power of repeated reading. It is really mastery learning within context. They read the same thing so many times that they now can identify some of the words here in a new place. It's very powerful. But it's powerful for another reason. Repeated reading builds self-esteem. You know, the children we work with, they don't think they can read. They know they don't read very well. And they doubt they can ever sound like anybody else. They hear the difference. And when we teach them to read, we don't really do much about that. When I think of how we teach children to read generally, it makes me think of the Greek myth Sisyphus. He was a king who angered the Greek gods. And he was punished for all eternity by being forced to roll a boulder to the top of the mountain. His punishment really was, though, besides rolling the boulder, sounds bad enough, is that he was never going to get to the top. He'd almost get there. And about the time he just reached the top where he could feel he had finished a job, enjoy the view, be done, the boulder would roll back down again, and Sisyphus would have to begin again. Think of how we teach reading. We give children a story. At-risk children, the story is a boulder. We help them with the boulder. Give them background knowledge, give them vocabulary, teach them how to decode, make promises of wonderful recesses to come. And about the time the at-risk child can read the story at the top of the mountain, not quite, but almost, what do? New story. You can't stand to listen to that story again. And they never sit at the mountaintop. But repeated reading gives them an opportunity to take a short passage, read it so many times that they too can read for pleasure. It changes their opinion of their ability to sound like others. It changes their opinion of how much fun reading can be when you actually can read. So repeated reading is powerful because it's mastery learning and because it changes attitude.
The third strategy that makes Read Naturally work is progress monitoring. Progress monitoring is a combination of setting a goal and then providing feedback on progress towards that goal. For a great example of progress monitoring, watch a child play video games. A video game presents a specific goal: to locate the treasure, get to the next level, beat that last score, and so on. It also provides immediate, specific, relevant feedback about a player's progress toward that goal. The combination of having a goal and getting feedback can be very motivating. In Read Naturally, progress monitoring is what motivates students to reread a story many times.
The next fluency strategy that we'll discuss is PALS, Peer-Assisted Learning for Reading. We will discuss this implementation following the audio, as well as view the slide that breaks down the different components of PALS.
To get PALS going, you have to really do three things. The first one is you have to really get a sense of what it actually is. So take a peek at this slide while I describe the activities. First of all, there's two students who are working together to read one text. And they alternate, assigned as partner A and partner B. So basically, a timer rings and partner A starts reading aloud while partner B tracks the text with his eyes and notices whether partner A needs any help with words. So that happens for 5 minutes. Partner A is just reading non-stop for 5 minutes. Then, as the timer rings, they switch roles. They go forward in the text. Partner B picks up where partner A left off and reads orally while partner A tracks and helps if necessary. So 5 more minutes elapse. Now it's been 10 minutes of reading aloud. And the two partners stop reading altogether, look back in the text, and take turns telling one another what they have just read. So, for example, partner A says, well, the first part was about, and then partner B says, and then the next part was about, and partner A goes, oh yeah, and then, so they alternate recreating the text out loud, so creating kind of a collaborative summary. And that happens for 2 minutes. Then there's a new activity, which is called paragraph shrinking, and partner A reads and shrinks for 5 minutes. Paragraph shrinking, I'll tell you more about it later, but it's generally reading a hunk of the text and then summarizing it. And then partner A reads another hunk of the text and summarizes it. And partner A does that for 5 minutes, and then it's time for partner B to do it. Finally, the two partners add one more activity, which is a prediction relay. In that final 10 minutes, partner A makes a prediction, reads a chunk of text, summarizes it, and then makes a new prediction. And partner A does that for 5 minutes. When time is called, partner B does the same thing. So PALS is a structured way to read, and there are some very simple rules to teach kids to use to accomplish the PALS tasks.
This is the film that she referred to in the audio, and it breaks down the PALS strategy into pieces. As she mentioned, the first 10 minutes are partner reading, with each partner getting 5 minutes. And then they take a very quick break at the end of that 10 minutes, and they share the retelling, alternating turns. The next 10 minutes is alternating paragraph shrinking. Paragraph shrinking was previously unfamiliar to me before I had implemented the PALS strategy. And it's simply just reading a piece of the text and summarizing, reading and summarizing. Prediction relay is not all that different from paragraph shrinking. It simply adds the element of prediction. You read a small bit, you summarize, you make a prediction, read more, summarize, make a new prediction. The total is 32 minutes. But obviously this is going to be once your students understand the procedure, and that is probably the most time-consuming aspect of this, is training students, and obviously you need to begin with modeling. We have another very, very quick video that is going to expound on some of the benefits of utilizing PALS.
Hello, awesome students. Today's class is about PALS reading. We're going to discuss the description of PALS reading, which student profiles benefit, how we can incorporate it into the classroom, and research that supports efficiency. First off, what is PALS? The Peer-Assisted Learning Strategies PALS reading program was originally developed for grades 2 to 6. It is now expanded to incorporate kindergarten, grade 1, and high school. Usually, PALS reading occurs 3 times a week for 35-minute sessions for a period of 16 weeks. The program is used to supplement the pre-existing curriculum, not to replace it. Why is the PALS reading program beneficial? Well, as a teacher, it is difficult to provide adequate instruction for an academically diverse classroom. Those who are at risk for reading failure and/or have learning disabilities do require considerably more instructional engagement, but teachers are unable to do so because of the lack of time allocated within the term and the number of students they need to address. As a result, most lessons provide undifferentiated whole group instruction, and the much-needed individual attention becomes neglected. It has proven to be effective not only for students with LD, but for low and average achieving students because the books are geared towards their reading level. It also benefits students with emotional behavioral disorders, as we'll discuss. The best part of the PALS reading program is that it increases the amount of time allocated for individual engagement with the materials. How? Well, it's structured interaction between partners, frequent interaction, feedback, reciprocal teaching and learning. The teacher is no longer the only educator within the classroom. Students also take on this role and share this responsibility as they successfully aid their fellow classmates in the learning process. Now we're going to talk about PALS in the kindergarten and first grade. Because the grades 2 to 6 PALS activities require some degree of reading competency for meaningful participation, different activities were created to accommodate the development of skills appropriate for younger children. At this age, children are learning the alphabetic code through phonological awareness, sound letter correspondence, decoding, and fluency. The students that are unable to read, it is not always due to poor instruction, environmental disadvantages, and certainly not because of low intelligence. Sometimes the individuals have a learning disability. Students with reading disabilities could have defects in the phonological process. Meet Billy. Billy was diagnosed with developmental dyslexia. Copying down notes takes a copious amount of time, and even finding a page number in a book proves to be a difficult task. Billy knows that he performs at a slower pace than his fellow classmates, and because of this, he is in constant fear of being ridiculed. Instead of asking questions for clarification and assistance, he finds ways to distract his classmates to avoid work. What is dyslexia and how does it affect Billy? Dyslexia is not a result of poor instruction, but is neurological and often genetic. Most students who have reading disabilities or developmental dyslexia struggle to use alphabetic cues to decode words, and as a result, these students often have difficulties with accurate word recognition, decoding, and spelling. Billy has an inability to phonologically process information. This means that his brain is unable to properly use the sound system of language to process written and oral information. This program teaches one of the processes, phonemic awareness. In order to master alphabets and eventually words, phonemic awareness needs to develop in Billy. Right now, he has difficulties identifying, isolating, and manipulating phonemes. First grade PALS has 2 main activities. There is sound and word and hearing sounds. We're going to talk about hearing sounds. Hearing sounds is performed in the same manner. The coach is given a list of simple words, and the reader has to identify the first and last sound that is underlined in the word. Students are thereby practicing phonemic segmentation. This is done through modeling. Each word is printed, and there are dots below each letter sound or syllable. The coach says each word slowly, stretching the sound, and thereby isolating each phoneme, and then quickly. After this is done, he or she asks, what is the first and last sound? It is the reader's job to say each sound within the word as identified by the dots. Unacceptable. Unacceptable is broken down into a syllable-sized unit that makes it easier for the student to recognize certain letters and to sound out the words based on what his memory has retrieved from the tutor's examples and previous knowledge and regurgitated. Billy, therefore, does not need to rely as much on his executive functioning and working memory. This develops fluent word recognition and phonological awareness, as Billy's ability to read has improved. The reader is able to look at the page, use memory, and process the written and oral information simultaneously, thereby improving their phonemic awareness and decoding skills. As new words and sounds are introduced each week, students are constantly reviewing. This also leads to the development of fluent word recognition. So thanks to PALS, Billy's phonological awareness has increased, and he is now an active reader.
So thanks to PALS,
Billy's phonological
This
awareness
could also
was
be
increased,
incorporated
and he
through
is now an
cross-age
active
tutoring.
reader.
In one class, 5th grade students volunteered with the Reading Buddies
This could
program
also
and
be
were paired with
incorporated
1st
through
graders
cross-age
for one
tutoring.
period
In
a
one
week.
class,
The
5th grade
process is
students
as follows.
volunteered with the Reading
1st
Buddies
graders
program
would choose
and
a
were paired
primary
with
level
1st
book
graders
and read it
for
cover
one
to
period a
cover.
week.
They would
The
then
process
select
is
6
as
to 12
follows.
vocabulary
1st graders
words
would choose a
and
primary level book
that
and
they
read it
thought
cover
might
to
be difficult
cover.
for a
They
1st
would then
grader to
select
read
6
and
to
or
12
understand.
vocabulary words
Taking this list of
and
words, they would produce them on
that they thought might be
flashcards,
difficult for a
printing the
1st
word
grader
on
to
one
read and
side
or
and a sentence
understand.
that contained it on
Taking
the
this
back.
list of words,
They would
produce
also
them on
think of 6
flashcards,
comprehension
printing a
questions
word
to
on
accompany
one
the
side and a
text.
sentence that contained it on the back.
Now that they had
They
their
would
reading buddy
also
with
think
them,
of
they
6
present the
comprehension
flashcards
questions to
reading
accompany
the
the text.
word and then using it in a sentence to
Now that
help
they
them
have their
discover
reading
the
buddy with
meaning.
them, they
They
present
take
the
turns reading the
flashcards,
book
reading
orally and then
the
discuss the
word,
comprehension
and then using it
questions.
in a sentence to
What
help
is
them
the benefits
discover
of
the
this
meaning.
process?
They take
Well,
turns
here,
reading
all
the book
students are
orally
able to
and then
benefit
discuss
through
the comprehension
participation.
questions.
The coach becomes
What
a
is the
role
benefits
model
of
and
this
they develop a
process?
sense of
Well, here, all
responsibility
students
that
are
can be
able to
used in
benefit
other
through
activities.
participation.
Here,
The
Billy,
coach
with
becomes a
his
role
1st
model,
grade
and they
tutor, is
develop a
able to
sense of
benefit immensely
responsibility
through
that
the
can be used
flashcards
in
that
other
first display
activities.
the word and then
Here,
reflect its
Billy,
meaning.
with his
This
1st grade
process
tutor, is
enhances
able
his
to benefit
phonological awareness
immensely through
because
the
through the
flashcards
verbal
that first display the
exclamation
word and then reflect its
and
meaning.
the
This
aid of the
process
tutor,
enhances
he is
his
able to use
phonological
the
awareness
sound
because
system of
through the
language
verbal
to simultaneously
exclamation
process written and
and
oral
the
information,
aid
store
of
the
the tutor,
information
he
learned
is
within
able
his
to use
memory,
the sound
and
system
relate
of
it back
language
to
to
the book
simultaneously
when he reads
process
it.
written and oral information,
Unfortunately,
store the
the teaching
information
of
learned
phonemic
within his
awareness may
memory,
not always be
and relate it back to
successful
the
due
book
to a student's
when he
inability
reads
to
it.
retrieve phonological codes
Unfortunately,
from
the
long-term
teaching of
memory. This
phonemic
is also
awareness
known
may
as
not always
lexical
be
retrieval
successful
weakness.
due to a student's
The process of
inability to
listening and
retrieve
reading, storing the
phonological codes
information
from
within the
long-term
brain, and
memory
retrieving it
is
to
also
answer
known
the
as
scripted
lexical
questions
retrieval
becomes
weakness.
difficult.
The process
Other
of
forms of
listening and reading,
intervention
storing the
may be
information within the brain,
necessary.
and
Now we're
retrieving
going
it
to
to
talk about
answer
grades
the
2 to
scripted
6.
questions becomes
When Billy enters
difficult.
grades 2 to 6,
Other
he can
forms of
continue learning
intervention
through the PALS
may be
program.
necessary.
Within grades 2
Now
to
we're going
6,
to
the
talk about
teacher
grades 2 to
implements
6.
3
When
35-minute
Billy
PALS
enters grades 2 to
sessions
6, he can continue
the
learning
main
through the
activities
PALS
include
program.
paragraph
Within
strengthening
grades
and
2 to 6,
production
the
relay.
teacher implements
Paragraph
3
strengthening
35-minute
requires
PALS
readers
sessions
to
each
monitor
week.
their
The
comprehension
main
and make
activities
deliberate
include
judgments
paragraph
on the
strengthening and
selection
production
and
relay.
reduction of
Paragraph
information.
strengthening requires
After reading a
readers
paragraph
to monitor their
2T,
comprehension and make
Lisa identified
deliberate
the main
judgments
idea in 10 or
on the
fewer
selection
words.
and reduction
By
of
summarizing
information.
text in this
After
form, it
reading a
enhances
paragraph
student
to
comprehension.
2T, Lisa identified
Prediction
the main
relay
idea
involves
in
the
10 or
2T
fewer
making
words.
and
By
checking predictions
summarizing
they
text
have
in
of the
this form, it
text.
enhances
This is
student
associated with
comprehension.
stronger comprehension because
Prediction
students
relay
need to
involves the
create
2T making
new
and
predictions as
checking
they read,
predictions they have of
for
the
the
text.
original
This is
expectations may not
associated with
occur.
stronger comprehension
They
because
also
students
perform
need
the
to create
task
and
of
new
summarizing the story by
predictions as they read.
resequencing what they've
For
read.
the original
The coach
expectations
asks,
may
what did
not
you learn
occur.
first? What did you
They
learn
also
next?
perform
Etc.
the task
until the
of
story is
summarizing the
complete.
story by
This process
resequencing
also
what they
enhances
read.
student
The coach
comprehension.
asks, what did you
These
learn
comprehension
first?
activities
What
are
did you learn
challenging
next?
exercises
Etc.
in
until the
which
story
all
is complete.
students, regardless of
This
their
process
ability,
also
are
enhances
able to
student
participate in.
comprehension. These
In each of the
comprehension
cases,
activities are
student
challenging
engagement to
exercises
reading
in which all
increased,
students, regardless of their
as
ability,
such, so
are
did
able
their
to
skills.
participate in.
They were able to
In each of
construct
the
meaning from
cases,
the
student
text, make
engagement to
predictions,
reading
and summarize the text by
increased,
retelling it
and
verbally.
as such, so did
Here,
their
students
skills.
have repeated
They were able
exposure
to
to
construct
vocabulary,
meaning
are
from the
able to
text, make
expand
predictions, and
on their
summarize the text by
internal
retelling it verbally.
lexicon.
Here,
High
students have
school.
repeated
Now
exposure
Billy
to
has entered high
vocabulary,
school.
are able to
If a
expand
student has a limited
on
reading
their
competence, it
internal
can result in lower self-esteem
lexicon.
and behavioral issues.
High school.
These students
Now
are less
Billy has
likely to
entered high
compete
school.
in high school
If a
than
student
more
has a
skillful
limited
readers
reading
due to the high
competence, it
stress
can
and lack of
result in lower
motivation.
self-esteem and
This
behavioral
reading program
issues.
thereby aids
These
at-risk
students are less
students
likely to
who
compete
contain
in high
learning
school
disabilities
than
around
more
lower
skillful
reading
readers due to
ability.
the high stress and lack of
High school
motivation.
PALS
This
reading
reading
is also
program
centered
thereby
around
aids
motivating
at-risk
students to
students
learn.
who contain learning
Terminology
disabilities who have
does
lower
change
reading ability.
within the
High
secondary
school
school system to
PALS
cater
reading
to
is
the
also
maturity.
centered around motivating
Instead of
students
using
to
sports
learn.
metaphors such as
Terminology
coaches, he uses
does
work
change
themes. For the two
within
teams
the
become the
secondary school
workers, and if
system
they
to cater to
succeed,
the
they can
maturity.
earn earn rewards such as Employee of the Month or PAL dollars.
Coaches.
Students at the age need reinforcement to learn,
become
so the
the
PAL
workers,
dollars
and
can
at
be used
age
to purchase
60, they can earn
donated
rewards such
items
as
from
Employee
PAL
of the Month or
catalogs
PAL
such as
dollars.
CDs and sports
Students
team
at the
apparel.
age need reinforcement
These
to learn.
activities remain
So
the same, but the
PAL
content
dollars can be used to
changes,
purchase donated
making it more
items
relevant
from
to
PAL
students' lives.
catalogs such as
It addresses
CDs
life
and sports
skills,
team
social
apparel.
relationships,
These
etc.
activities remain the same, but the content changes,
Billy has also
making it more
exhibited
relevant to
behavioral
students'
disorders
lives.
and social
It
skill
addresses life
deficits.
skills,
He was
social
constantly acting out in
relationships,
class in an
etc.
attempt to mask his so-called academic
Billy
inadequacies
has also
because he
exhibited
feared that other
behavioral
students
disorders
would
and
realize
social
that he
skill
lacked the ability
deficits.
to read.
He was
His
constantly
classmates
acting out in
often
class in
felt
an
as though
attempt
he
to
was a
mask his so-called
distraction and
academic
became easily
inadequacies
irritated with
because
him.
he feared that other students would
Research has
realize
shown
that
that
he
the
lacked
PALS
the
reading
ability to
program
read.
has greatly
His
improved
classmates often
the
felt as
emotional
though he
well-being
was
of
a
students
distraction
with
and
learning
became easily
disabilities. Quite often,
irritated
these
with him.
individuals, like Billy, have
Research has
social
shown
skill
that the PALS
deficits,
reading
behavioral
program has
disorders,
greatly
and because of
improved
these
the
issues,
emotional
they are
well-being
often
of students
alienated or
with
contain a
learning
lower
disabilities.
social
Quite
standing
often,
than the
these
majority of their
individuals,
peers.
like Billy, have
A
social
study
skill
was performed
deficits and
across
behavioral
39
disorders,
grade
and
6
because of these
classes
issues,
in Nashville,
they are often
Tennessee.
alienated or
22
contain a
teachers
lower
were
social
provided
standing
with the
than the
PALS reading
majority of their
program and
peers.
22 were
A
not,
study was
meaning that they
performed
did
across
not use
39 grade
cooperative
6
learning or
classes
peer
in
tutoring
Nashville,
with their
Tennessee.
students.
22 teachers were provided
By
with the PALS
examining
reading
the
program and 22 were
156
not,
children
meaning that
identified
they
with
did
LD
not
in the
use
study, they
cooperative learning
concluded
or
that
peer
these
tutoring with
students
their
within the
students.
PALS reading program outperformed the
By
no PALS
examining the
classes. How might
156
you ask?
children
Simple.
identified with LD in the
The
study,
PALS
they
reading
concluded
program
that
requires
these students
individuals to
within the
frequently
PALS reading
interact and
program
work with one
outperformed the
another on
no-PALS
valued
classes.
tasks
How
in a
might
setting
you
that
ask?
they might not
Simple.
normally have done so. How is this beneficial? Well, teachers often use cooperative learning groups that contain 3 to 5 students. LD students are more likely to become marginalized in groups by peers who are more knowledgeable, verbal, and assertive. Students like Billy use this time to either stay silent or find opportunities to divert the conversation to more social topics, thereby avoiding the task at hand. Their peer tutoring process of PALS reading makes this virtually impossible because each student is assigned a role and responsibility, making both partners equally indispensable. Billy, being unable to hide through the one-on-one interaction, is now forced to learn in a more productive setting, thereby improving his abilities. As such, the physical process of PALS reading, unlike the cooperative learning groups, promote academic growth by providing everyone with the opportunity to learn, reflect, and repeat. As a result, 20 to 50% of these 156 children identified with LD or speech and language impairments have shown gains in reading in comparison to the non-PALS classes because the activities are now geared towards their individualistic needs. Students are practicing strategies that have been shown to strengthen reading fluency and comprehension when implemented regularly and with accuracy. But great, Billy has learned to read, but what about his behavioral issues and social skill deficits? By cooperating with a tutor or tutee, each student develops skills such as listening and respect as they respond to their peers. If students have social skill deficits or behavioral problems, quite often they may distract, irritate, anger, confuse, embarrass, or negatively impress other children. This activity gets them to focus their attention on cooperation. As a result, most students within the class began to socially accept them. Towards the end of the study, students were to rate their classmates with a happy face for like, a sad face for dislike, or a neutral face for being indifferent. In the non-PALS classes, students had a negative social preferencing rating towards LD students, whereas in the PALS classroom, students had a positive social preference rating. LD students were seen as equal to lower achieving, average achieving, and higher achieving students. Success. The peer tutoring therefore became a means for which teachers could facilitate the social integration for students with LD. Through this interaction, students started to get to know Billy. He now feels like he is part of the class.
Number teacher testimonials. Hi, I'm Miss Johnson from DuPont Elementary School. This is my 4th year teaching kindergarten. I have never had so many students reading at this time in kindergarten. The program is very easy to implement and extremely beneficial to all students. All students will go to 1st grade knowing letters, sounds, decoding skills, and reading money words. Students who participated in this program will have a head start on other children in regards to reading as they enter the 1st grade.
Go to 1st grade knowing letters, sounds, decoding skills, and reading money words. Students who participated in this program will have a head start on other children in regards to reading as they enter the 1st grade.
One of my favorite things about the PALS strategy for me has been that students of all abilities get the opportunity to be the expert. They both get the opportunity to be the coach. They both get the opportunity to feel successful. The other thing I really like is that students who aren't as strong readers get a model. That makes the pairing of students incredibly important, and a lot of time needs to go into preparing before you begin training your students on the PALS process. This form is an observation form, and its intent is for administrative observations, but I think it is very helpful when you are beginning the process to self-evaluate exactly what process, what procedures, and what components that you're implementing with Fidelity. And so I've included this in case you choose to utilize the PALS program in your classroom. It'll give you a chance to, it's a very simple checklist to determine if you are incorporating the procedures correctly. And not everything that we do to improve student fluency has to be a formal process like with PALS and Read Naturally. There are several things that we can incorporate in our everyday instruction. One of the biggest things I've found success with is choral reading. And that's simply when everyone reads together or a group reads together. I've also found it's very important to utilize a variety of types of text, from drama to poetry and even song lyrics. This year we began using song lyric videos. And a lot of times the students are familiar with the lyrics, but the lyrics videos, the speed forces them to read a little more quickly than they generally would, and I've seen a great impact fluency with that. And that's based off a commercial program called Lyrics to Learn that we'll talk about later in the technology component. But that's one of those things that if the resources aren't there, that we can pretty easily accommodate. Another fluency strategy that has proven to be immensely successful, one of the reasons is readers theater. And one of these reasons is because students find that it's more authentic. They feel value and they take more ownership in readers theater because they're part of an entire process. Classroom fluency centers. Even if you don't typically use centers in your classroom, setting up a fluency center with passages, some basic technology, just anything where students can record and hear their own readings. A lot of times they self-correct just amazingly better if they hear themselves. Repeated reading is also a great strategy, and it really there's no additional materials needed. This is another, even for those of us with not a lot of resources, and that's the case for many of us in Title I schools who are working with kids who are dealing with these fluency issues. Another thing, we need to look at the process of the way we teach reading. Sometimes we tend to think of it as a sequential process, that we're working our way through the dimensions of reading instruction. And so a lot of times when we begin focusing strictly on fluency, we abandon word study. And in my point of view, and research tends to agree, is that that's a mistake. Students who are working on fluency need to continue increasing their vocabulary, increasing their word attack strategies. Specifically with lower SES students, we really have to be cognizant of the difference in their background knowledge and the difference in their vocabulary when we choose texts. And when we choose text, we have to be aware of possible background knowledge deficits that could impair their ability to understand what they're reading in those texts. I love these resources, and they are from Teaching with a Mountain View, and they are available for free at the blog of the same name or at Teachers Pay Teachers. These, on the right, you find a checklist that students can utilize themselves. A lot of students aren't cognizant of the process of being a fluent reader. We often fail, especially in the earlier grades, to address metacognition with students. And I think these checklists, while pretty simple, can push students to be more aware, to think metacognitively when they're reading, to think about what they're doing, to think about how they're approaching reading. And of course, technology is very important in incorporating in all areas of our instruction, besides the fact that it is incredibly motivational for students. And there is a host, just a volume of fluency solutions out there related to technology. Obviously some better than others. Even basic technology, just simple audio recording on our tablets or laptops with microphones, will allow students to analyze their own reading. And you can also utilize that to provide a mentor. Obviously, we can't be everywhere in our classrooms like we would like to be. And this type of technology allows you to provide mentoring for students at, perhaps at a center. Lyrics to Learn, it's another program that I mentioned earlier. It is a commercial pay program in which students use music to proceed through a series of lessons that are designed to make them more fluent readers. It is amazing, but then again, it is also a paid program. K-12 Timed Reading Comprehension is another app that I've used. It's available for both iPhone and Android. There's a free version that's very basic, but it is also very functional. The paid version, I think, is something like $5 at the Play Store, or on iTunes. I'm sure it's comparable. But the fabulous thing about that app is it records the student's reading. It provides a fluency score. It also addresses comprehension. The students are asked comprehension questions at the end of each passage that they read. And I like that the passages are responsive to the student's previous fluency score and kind of builds in the rigor. And this is a school-wide program that we use. I'm sure many of you all use it as well. Myon provides students, and this is especially fabulous for our lower SES students who may not have a bookshelf of books at home to choose from. But Myon takes that bookshelf with them. Anywhere they log in, there is a volume of not simply passages, but actual rich literature available to them. And many of the tools will read aloud for students who need mentoring or choral reading. It also provides a place for teacher input so that you can monitor comprehension. You can assign particular text based on whatever content if you're reading across the curriculum. Just the possibilities are endless with that program. Fluency instruction, while sometimes more controversial simply because of the way we approach it, is absolutely necessary, because the automaticity that's promoted by fluency instruction is paramount to comprehension. Very, very seldom do you find a reader who struggles with fluency but is still strong in comprehension. Generally, one requires the other. And fluency is one of the few things in reading that we can tangibly measure. And for many students, it can be incredibly motivating to know that last time I was only reading 76 words per minute, but this time, I've really practiced this passage, and now I'm up to 89 words per minute. And while, fluency, is highly related to decoding, the confidence that it creates definitely impacts comprehension. But as I mentioned, there are some controversies to fluency instruction. Often we overstress fluency because it can be measured, and we create students who are very successful decoders. I mean, we've all worked with the word callers, but they don't gain the requisite skills that will help them translate being great word callers into fabulous readers as far as comprehension goes, which, as we all know, is the whole purpose of reading. But then, contrary to what we just talked about, there are students who do not read quickly, which often translates to low fluency numbers, but they are comprehending, which in actuality is the more important, or in my estimation, is the more important dimension. And thirdly, and this is an issue I see with a lot of my students become so focused on reading quickly that they comprehend less than they were when they were reading more slowly. My students tend to be very competitive, and they like to get their numbers up. And a lot of times to do that, they sacrifice truly understanding what they're reading. And conversely, just as We mentioned earlier it can be very motivating for students to be able to tangibly, numerically see their progress. At the same time, for students who are reading at a lower level, this can be very defeating and have a negative impact on their motivation. I really, this quote, well, I'll read it to you. Literacy is not a luxury. It is a right and responsibility. If our world is to meet the challenges of the 21st century, we must harness the energy and creativity of all our citizens. I think the most important word in this quote is all. And when we have 1 in 5 of our students living in poverty, and we're finding that they score 60% lower on standardized tests, that tells us that we are not addressing the needs of all of our students. And that's why it is imperative to find ways to impact these roadblocks that are in the way of many of our students, that stand in the way between them and fluent comprehension. And so I hope that you have gained some things that you can incorporate in your practice. And if not, I hope that you'll continue searching for things that will impact these students who are growing up in poverty so that they can be part of a literate society and break this cycle. Thank you.